outside. Continue. And warming up some chi in between our hands and just gently sweeping away the face muscles. If there's anywhere on your face, like your temples or your jaw, your cheeks, your earlobes, give it a little love before three sounds. Thank you. May we breathe in and out together, creating a retreat space wherever we are, in our sweet abodes or our workplaces. And a few short words by Tai called Earth Touching. Here is the foot of a tree. Here is an empty, quiet place. Here is a cushion. Dear sibling, why don't you sit down? Sit upright. Sit with solidity. Sit in peace. Don't let your thoughts lift you up into the air. Sit so that you can really be able to touch the earth and be one with her. You may like to smile, sibling. Earth will transmit to you her solidity, her peace, and her joy. With your mindful breathing, with your peaceful smile, you sustain the mudra of earth touching. Thank you. Thank you so much for being here, feeling utmost heart gratitude for you showing up and being here in this retreat to take good care of yourselves and to open your hearts. I'll pass it to my sister Simona, who will also share a little bit about this call. Thank you.
Dear friends, this is Simona bowing in. I use the pronouns she and her. I'm calling in from Urubamba, Peru, home of the Quechua culture. And I'm going to talk a little bit, just briefly, about the what of what we're doing right now is an interactive space. So you are all invited into this conversation. We're doing a question and response panel. And we want to hear from you. We want to be in relationship. And although we know we have 90 minutes and that we may not be able to tend to every question that comes in, we still want them. And we're going to continue this conversation after this call. And I'll talk a little bit about how to stay engaged near the end. But just to know that your questions, filter them in through Brother Dukneem. So Brother Dukneem, thank you so much for being here. Wonderful tech support and monitoring chat. And so that's where you want your questions to go. You'll see that at the top of your chat list under host. And so going forward into the panel discussion, I'd like to introduce my dear brother John. John Bell, our moderator, is a Plum Village Dharma teacher who first met Tai in 1982 when he was organizing a conference against nuclear weapons at which Tai spoke. Since the 1960s, he's been a lifelong social justice activist on issues of youth leadership, racism, poverty, peace, and the environment. For 10 years, he worked with Children of War that brought young people to the US from 20 war zones to share their stories and mobilize US youth. And 30 years building with the Youth Build Movement, a leadership development program with low-wealth young people in 260 local youth build programs across the United States. He serves on the Caretaking Council of the Earthholder community and lives in the Boston area. John, over to you.
Dear Ty, dear friends, thank you, Simone and Sarah. A Zen teacher named Robert Aiken Roshi wrote, he's a poet and activist, he wrote one of my favorite short poems. It goes like this. Hearing the crickets at night, I vow with all beings to find my place in the harmony crickets enjoy with the stars. Isn't that beautiful? And I think a good guess about why most of us came to this particular workshop and maybe to the retreat is that we know currently we don't have that kind of harmony. We know we're out of right relationship with the earth and the beings and each other in some ways. And we know that this beautiful earth is groaning under the weight of suffering. And this reality evokes in us deep feelings. On the one hand, love and compassion for this awesome, beautiful work of creation, of which we're an emanation. And on the other hand, feelings of heartache, fear, anger, despair, hopelessness, and grief about the immense suffering that we see all around. So we're looking for ways to help, ways to care, ways to love, ways to contribute to the end of suffering. Is this a good summary of why maybe most of us are here, basically? Yeah, I think that's, for me, that's true. So about 7 years ago, a group of us, with the leadership of a beloved former monastic brother Phap Ho from Sweden, got together and formed what became the Earthholder community. And it was dedicated to preserving, protecting, loving the earth and all beings. And so today what we have is the people you see on the panel are all members of something called it's a Sangha within the Earthholder community called the Regional Community Builders from London, from England, Ireland, Peru, and the United States. Right now we're mostly focused in the North America on what we call Turtle Island, for those in the U.S. But we're beginning to, sprout Earthholder Sanghas around the world, which we'll talk a little bit about later. So we're going to talk about, I'm going to ask different people to speak about 6 different topics that we think answer some of the questions you might have. So one is, what's the basic earthholding about? What are practices? Where does the term come from? What's the community? The second was, why is environmental and racial justice at the core of what we're doing? The third is, what are some examples of earth-holding Sangha building efforts? Some of you may want to build Sangha around this topic. The fourth is, what are some ways we've applied earth-holding to the crisis, the environmental justice crisis? The fifth is, what are some challenges that develop in earth-holding work, both internally and in the world? And finally, what are some ways that we collaborate and bring our practices to other organizations as we move out into the world? So, starting us out, Heather Lynn Mann, who is sitting in a tent in Florida, kayaking and on a trip with her partner. Her Dharma name is True Lotus Peace. She co-founded the Indigo Sangha of Greater Charleston, South Carolina in the U.S. and is an active participant in the Sangha's Racial Justice Project. She founded and directed the Wisconsin Center for Resilient Cities for many, many years, a nonprofit devoted to growing community through food, land, and learning. And in 2016, Parallax Press, publishing arm of the Thich Nhat Hanh community, published her death-defying, life-affirming memoir, which I have read and highly recommend, called "The Ocean of Insight: A Sailor's Voyage from Despair to Hope." So Heather, you were among the first Earth holders back in 2014 and you served on the Caretaking Council for 5 years. Would you talk with us about, what Earth holding is and where does the term come from and how did the Earth holding community emerge and develop? Thank you. John bowing out.
Thank you, John. Heather bowing in. Earth holding community sort of was born from our hearts. Many people who were looking deeply into the question of how will we continue and apply Thich Nhat Hanh's teachings on caring for the earth. And Thai gave us some wonderful books on this subject, and he gave us also a number of practices. So he's given us such a beautiful launch. We knew that this is the practice of engaged Buddhism, and that earth holding and protecting is this very large Dharma door that we needed to learn how to walk through. And so many of us in very early 2015, we were seeing that there was listserv as part of the Order of Interbeing, the core community of this tradition that was talking about environmental issues and how to care for the world. There was a weekend workshop at Deer Park in Escondido, California, one of the monasteries. And there was also this beautiful example of the work that they were doing in Deer Park of building a solar array to be able to sustain all of the workshops and the retreats that were going on there, the brothers and sisters who lived there. So there was this great depth of practice and kind of a call to come together. And what Thai has taught us is that we need to apply this to our daily living. That earth holding, that term, comes from his book, The World We Have. And in that book, he talks about the Bodhisattva Dara Nimdara, that he translates into the one who cared for the world, the air, the water, and the soil. And he also said another way of thinking about it is an earth holder. And so this really rang in our hearts that we wanted to be earth holders. We wanted to step onto this path and figure out how to embody the practice fully as we work to bring peace, healing, and transformation to our Mother Earth. I would say that there's one other thing that's really become very alive in the hearts of earth holders right now is the awareness that we need to, from a skillful means perspective, we need to be focused on and caring for those who are most vulnerable. Because when we care for those who are most vulnerable, we end up caring for everyone. And so I think Thai would wholeheartedly agree with this as skillful means. And when we're talking about caring for the most vulnerable, we're talking about people, animals, plants, and minerals without separation. So this is our ideal that we live into, to be our own bodhisattvas, Nimdara, our own earth holders. And in 2015, as I said, there were many people that were holding this in their hearts. And so we began to have a number of conversations. And I shared not just that it is so very good to make from your community. And we have 5 years of doing that as a community and practicing and deeply into this connection.
Hey Heather, I'm having a pretty hard time hearing you. Does anyone else? Hey Heather, could you pause for a second and because want to make sure we hear what you're saying.
Okay.
Heather, this is
Um,
John. If you can hear me, maybe you turn off your video for the moment to save some bandwidth and just talk to us. Sorry, folks.
I will do that if I'm not able to do that. I'll go ahead and just wait and I'll dial back in. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Well, let me just say that as our community progressed, the Caretaking Council progressed in our practice of earth holding and protecting, one of the things we realized was that we were an all-white community of people that were looking into this question, and that we were a white community that was part of a global community. And this was really not okay. So we held off on our programs to spend some time looking deeply into what we as white people needed to do to be more skillful in meeting the needs of all people and being welcoming to all people. And we went through an extensive process that began with a year of deep looking with the facilitator, and then really re-examining our programs to figure out how we could be more relevant to all people. And then also bringing to our caretaking council Black, Indigenous, and other people of color in equal measure, in at least as many BIPOC members on our caretaking council and leadership positions as there were white people, because we knew that there was going to be wisdom there and skillful means that we weren't in possession of because of our limited histories and background. So in 2019, that process began, and it was really quite a beautiful unfolding to see our caretaking council double. So I believe I have one more minute, and with that time, I'll just say that we have a number of earth holder practices that we have developed. Many of them are about the internal work we need to do, whether it's waking ourselves up to our relationship with Mother Earth, figuring out how to apply our ethics to our daily living, or just taking care of ourselves. And that is not a just, that's a big one that needs to happen moment to moment. And then we have a number of practices that are around relational skill building, which is how do we work within our sanghas? How do we work with people in the community that are outside of our Buddhist tradition? And then how does all of that come together into compassionate, direct action? So I think you're going to be hearing many of these things today as we're sharing. And so I'm going to go ahead and turn it over back to John. Thank you very much. Heather bowing out.
Thank you, Heather. So we're going to shift to the second question. Why is racial and environmental justice a central point for our work? And Simona is going to start us out. Her Dharma name is Dancing of the Presence Source. She's an Indigenous environmental rights activist with feet rooted both in the North and the South. She's an Earth Holder community coordinator, and a darn good one, and enjoys weaving webs of community practice and engagement to lift up the healing of our precious planet. She lives in Peru. Simona, would you share with us why environmental and and racial justice are core to earth holding work? Bowing out.
Dear friends, thank you for the question, John. When I think about the relationship of environmental and racial justice and what it means to be truly holding the earth and caring for the earth, it is because there's this recognition and acknowledgement that the healing of the earth is not possible without centering the liberation of marginalized communities, specifically for this conversation now, those who are Black, Indigenous, and people of color. So I grew up in an area of Colorado in the United States that has a high population of Latin American diaspora, and many who make the journey from the global south to the north, which is also spiked in response to climate change, have settled in the town that I grew up in. And so this town also happens to be a highly fracked area of Colorado. And it's not a coincidence that the majority of the fracking wells in this town are placed in areas that are near to neighborhoods of these migrant communities. So in the town I grew up in, there is a school called Belo Romero that a fracking well was placed just 1,200 feet away from. So this is 1,200 feet away from children. And we know from studies that the output from fracking sites results in terrible air quality, and which is terrible for our bodies. So this was 1,200 feet away from the bodies of children. And this is in a neighborhood where these are brown-bodied children. The graduating class photos of the high school I attended now have a fracking well in the background. So that's 18-year-olds holding up their graduating diploma. And there's a fracking well right there. The university that I attended, there was a class that went for a site visit to my hometown to look at environmental destruction. So there's a name for this. It's environmental racism. And I didn't have this name when I was a child, but I had the vision, a peripheral vision of what it looked like. And now in Peru, I have another peripheral vision. My ancestry here is an ancestry of agriculture. And the locals in the Andean mountains here are the front line, right? They are what is standing between extraction companies and the health of nature, the health of these mountains, the health of these high alpine lakes, the health of these glaciers. There's a woman, her name is Maxima Acuna. She recently was awarded the Goldman Environmental Prize. A mining company approached her, asking if she would sell her land. Thank you, John. The mining company approached Maxima Acuna, and she stood up to them and wouldn't sell her land. They took her to court. They threatened her and her family, and she has still stood up. And her area of land that she cultivates, the earth, and is in relationship with the earth, is what stands behind an entire open pit mining corporation coming into Peru. And so I'm sharing a couple of these stories just to hope to lift up the link we see with environmental justice and racial justice. And knowing that holding this understanding, that we continue this holding in our practice for the liberation of all beings. Thank you. Simona, bowing out.
Thank you, Simona. Sarah Henry is going to talk a little bit more about the same topic. To introduce Sarah, Sarah's Dharma name is True Manifestation of Offering. She lives and works in Morning Sun, which is a residential community in Plum Village tradition in New Hampshire. It focuses on land stewardship and healing and conscious living. Sarah's a member of the Caretaking Council. She's co-chair, actually, where she gets to co-create Sangha energy that focuses on environmental healing, healing our inner world of wrong views, and healing our outer world of injustice and inequity. Sarah, thank you for talking about this topic also.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Mm-hmm.
Wonderful. Thank you, Simona, for sharing. I didn't know what I was going to say, so I just kind of like collected a bunch of ideas that have just been alive for me, knowing that there's no one concrete answer. There's the logistics of, we can look back at the data of Hurricane Katrina and the the tar pits and the river pollutions and who that affects, and holding this awareness that it's not just about race, but also about class and ability and many other isms, but that race, especially in North America, has become such a fabric of our society over the last hundreds of years. And recognizing, I just saw a meme that said, like, we're in the find out decade. Like, we're finding out what we've been creating with our habit energies. And something that I feel called to read is a short excerpt from Joan Halifax. And I invite us to apply this to our ideas of race, knowing that if we were raised in North America or have been touched by North American culture, like United States culture, that we've been taught many, many beliefs about skin color, such like a small genetic marker of our entire being. And this is in her chapter of Fruitful Darkness. And this is the way of the protectors. So I often read this and I either see myself as the poisonous plant, or I start to understand why I've othered people as the poisonous plant. And that could actually be people of color. That could be all of these different complexes and layers that are coming into what's holding me back from getting involved or practicing with that fear and that idea of why work on it if things should get better on a big level, and like realizing that it starts also here. Poisonous plants and creatures can be invoked as protectors, protectors of place. Within a bioregion, they protect the deeper forest and are allies to their ecologies. As allies of human beings, they protect us against drowsiness and insensitivity, preventing us from charging through fragile terrain with a heavy foot and blind eye. They teach us alertness and respect as we interact with place. And she goes on to talk about being like the jaguar, being like the poison oak. And when we take out the poison oak and we don't have a relationship with it that's conscious, maybe there's still extraction and removal or change, but what is the relationship with it? And knowing that all of our ancestors come from indigenous ancestry, but we've been cut off. So what I've been really enjoying seeing becoming part of an Earth Holder community is the willingness to have friendships along the path who are they willing to tell us that our white privilege is showing? And is there actual space in me to hear when I have internalized whiteness? And if there is space in me, can I recognize if I'm needing this space just for myself? Or can I actually open that space for someone else? Because we know intellectually that this is a big, big problem. It's just the data is insurmountable, yet our nervous systems aren't there yet. And that's why I'm really grateful that we're pausing to be able to open that space of like, how am I in this world? How am I on this planet? And knowing that this is a really huge part of it. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. Heather, you might like to turn on your video again so we can see you. Maybe turning it off only when you speak. Be great. So we're going to shift to the third question. What are some of the efforts that Earth Holders have made in both bringing Sangha, Earth Holding practices to an existing Sangha, and then also developing a whole Sangha that's devoted to Earth Holding work? So first is going to be Keith Miller, whose Dharma name is True Liberated Dwelling. He worked for 40 years in the environmental engineering and management, as well as sustainability in a corporate setting at 3M. He has been engaged in Earth Holder practices with the Buddhist community in the Twin Cities, where he lives, and with local governments. He is involved with Extinction Rebellion and other environmental sustainable organizations. And Keith, you began your earth holding work very early on when Ty came to do a retreat there on climate change. So would you talk to us about what it was like to start and how you built awareness around earth holding practice there in your area? Thank you. Unmute yourself if you would.
This is Keith bowing in. Thank you, John. Dear Ty, dear community. Yes, I had a long career being a corporate environmentalist. And in my local Sangha, wanted to bring in earth holder practices. And we started out really by reading The World We Have by Thich Nhat Hanh. And that was a really good starting point for our Sangha. And for a couple of reasons. One, to familiarize people with environmental issues and earth holding. But also we identified people that really were interested in doing earth holder work in our Sangha. And there's also a nice practice in that book, Earth Peace Treaty. And we had everyone in the Sangha fill that out. And it's about practices you can do to help protect and preserve the earth. And things like having a car-free day or recycling or a whole couple of pages of practices. And it really identified things that people were already doing and also things that people thought, I can do this, I can do some further practices. And after that, people were so interested, we read Love Letter to the Earth by Thich Nhat Hanh. And from that, we actually started doing Touching the Earth using the love letters to the earth in the back of that book. And that's been a nice practice for our Sangha. We also did a day of mindfulness, an Earth Holder Day of Mindfulness. And for that, we not only involved people from our Sangha, but we have another Sangha near us in the Twin Cities, and a couple of Sanghas about an hour away from us. And we invited them to do this day of mindfulness. And it was really a wonderful day of people in our region interested in doing earth holding work. And talked about what that really meant and in relation to our practice. And actually, John Bell had a outline for doing an Earth Holder Day that was in the Earth Holder Community Practice book. So we were able to utilize that. And that's still available in the Earth Holder Community Practice book. We've listened to Dharma talks over time and also read articles from the Mindfulness Bell. And so there were many ways that we got our Sangha involved in doing Earth Holder work. Keith, bowing out.
Thank you, Keith. I'd like to invite Jeff to talk about efforts to build a wider sort of regional Sangha. Jeff Johnson, whose Dharma name is True Harmonious Stream. I love these Dharma names, they're wonderful. As a public health scientist and educator, his work focused on the intersection of social justice and health inequity. He directed the Office of Global Health at the University of Maryland, which addressed inequities in health resources in Africa and the Caribbean region. And he lives in Baltimore. Jeff, would you talk about how your efforts of pulling together a mid-Atlantic regional Earth Holder Sangha?
Thank you, John. The Sangha I'm very grateful to be here today, and I would like to acknowledge all the work that's gone before me. I'm very new to Earth Holders, and until very recently, I would have been sitting where most of you are now, looking at someone like myself. So I'm looking at everything with fresh eyes, and so I just wanted to kind of put myself in that place and perhaps suggest some steps that one might take if they were going to try to develop a sangha. All of which I've had to take in very recent, in the last couple of years. So the first thing that I had to do was to really look deeply into the nature of my own aspiration. As much as I felt compelled by climate change, um, I felt the duty, sense of duty wasn't really enough. And I had to look more deeply and find the roots of gratitude and love for Mother Earth in my heart. And actually seeing myself, as I suggest, as the earth, walking on the earth. And so that by being able to act on behalf of the earth, I'm acting also on behalf of myself. And it's a form of freedom and liberation. It's a personal expression of what's deepest inside of me. So that's, I think, the first thing. And when I get tired, I kind of go back to that deeper aspiration. The second thing was the realization that I'm not alone, that I can reach out to other people. And that was suggested to me by a sister at Blue Cliff Monastery who said, why don't you go home? And she was talking to a group of us that were meeting to hear about Earth Holders. Why don't you go home and find a Buddha buddy? And you and that Buddha buddy can become a support system and think about how you could actually create a Sangha. And that's what I did. And actually, I had a Buddha buddy sitting right next to me, which was someone from my area. And we agreed to do that. We went back to the Washington, D.C., Virginia, Maryland area and got one other person. So with 3 people, we had a Sangha. And then we recruited from there. So we slowly grew and have been slowly growing over the last couple of years. And some of the steps that we've taken is to, first of all, really become embedded in the International Online Earth Holder Sangha, which is, if you haven't gone on to it, it's a wonderful resource. And there's all kinds of written material, but there are also signs that you can print out. There's a communications hub that allows you to connect with other people from around the world. And there's ongoing actual Sangha events online. So that's been very inspirational to us. And I think that the first action that we actually took was back in the September student strike. And we were encouraged to mobilize our regional Sangha, in part because of the call from Earth Holders to do that. And that allowed us to kind of step out, enter into dialogue with our various Sanghas in our region, and begin to develop a presence, an Earth Holder presence. So the last thing I wanted to mention that's really been important for us in our Sangha is to really center mindfulness practices within the ongoing life of the Sangha. And that involves like being a part of the natural world, of going into the natural world and expressing our love and gratitude for it, but also sharing with each other our suffering and our grief in what's happening to Mother Earth. And that's an important part of like maintaining our resilience and commitment in this process. Yeah.
Thank you, Jeff. Again, each of these could be hours long. We'd learn so much, but we're just getting little tastes. Martina Finn lives in Belfast. Her Dharma name is Harmonious Walk of the Heart. She's worked for many years in community development, the arts, and cultural management. More recently, she's been an active champion of permaculture, food sovereignty, and regenerative agriculture in her local government and community organizations in Belfast, and is a member of Extinction Rebellion and other environmental organizations. Through her engagement with Earthholder community of Turtle Island, over the past year, she's helped establish the Irish Earthholder Sangha. So Martina, would you share with us some of what went on in that effort that might be encouraging to other people? Thank you.
Thank you, John. Dear Sangha, dear Ty. It's wonderful to have the opportunity to share, and thank you so much for it. And just correct one little thing, I'm in Galway on the west coast of Ireland, John, rather than Belfast.
Sorry.
It's still an errand, so that's okay. And I just wanted to share that I came across the Earthholder Sangha. There's one a leaflet that I picked up in a little postcard that I picked up in Plum Village in 2016 on the 5th anniversary of the Order of Interbeing. And Naomi Green, one of the Earthholder Caretaker Council, held an affinity circle, and was speaking very much to the heart's concerns around climate change and ecological collapse, and the difficulties and challenges that Mother Earth was facing. And it was a large circle that really shared these concerns. And from there, I came back with my little postcard, thinking about the Earthholder Sangha and awakening a great togetherness as it states spring transformation and healing. And so I joined the Earthholder online on the monthly sessions on and off over a couple of years. And then I had a very great blessing, I suppose, that the Regional Community Builders was established, and that they had an open call for people who might be interested in assisting in growing the Earthholder Sangha in their own home sanghas. And I approached a number of the board of directors, specifically, I suppose, Leonie Baldwin was a huge support, an OI member and board of director for Mindfulness Ireland. And she very much supported the application and supported the aspiration for an Irish Earthholder Sangha, and spoke to the board, and they all really came in strongly behind an aspiration for the Earthholders to be brought to Ireland. So we were very, I suppose we were very young. We only started out last year. This time last year, we had our first day of mindfulness, and Leonie attended, and also another board member of Mindfulness Ireland, Mick McAvoy, who's currently the farm manager in the Plum Village Happy Farm. So Mick shared about the regenerative practices and the ecosystems restoration aspirations for the Plum Village Happy Farm, to kind of really inspire us about our own thinkings as well, about our own livelihoods. And we had hoped that we would continue having days of mindfulness and regional gatherings around the country with the other local sanghas, but due to COVID, we had to go online. So we started, I suppose, last summer on a monthly basis, hosting online, an Earthholder Sangha online, and invited a number of guests. And we're continuing to meet online on a monthly basis. We put a call out for people interested, and a wonderful team, a caretaking council, and a team was established from the call out. That have been, we've, really building, I suppose, a core caretaking council to, really firm up our own friendships, and put firm foundations for an Earthholder Sangha here in Ireland, and to see how we can continue to invite the wider Sangha and also the wider community to engage, I suppose, with us on Earthholder practices. So we also screened a Rebel for Life film by Wouter Vertussen that was done in partnership with Plum Village. And we hope to host further guests and visitors, and host other film screenings also. Just, I suppose, to continue open the platform as a place for people to gather, and a place for people to hear more about the Earthholder Sangha, but also embrace the Earthholder practices that are being developed within within the Earthholder Sangha. So thank you, John.
Thank you, Martina. And just to shout out, the postcard that Martina held up, I think was designed by George Hoguet, who's on our is on is in the audience. I don't know how to say it. Is in the group with us here. So thank you, George. Two other people that are part of this group of community builders who are not on the panel is Teresa Whitney and Jennifer Phelps. So we honor their work also. So shifting to another topic, applying Earthholder practices. I'd like Keith and then Sarah to really talk about some ways that you've brought the earthholding practices to helping relieve suffering of Mother Earth and its creatures. So Keith, would you like to start?
Keith bowing in. Thank you, John. Yes. Well, I've talked about how we have prepared our Sangha and practices for earthholding, and then we were really interested in going out and doing things to help address especially the climate emergency. And I think the first walk we did, we've done a number of climate walks, but in 2016, in November, the Paris Climate Accords were being worked on, and there were other groups marching on that particular issue, and we decided to do a global climate walk to support the people working on the Paris Climate Agreement and their work to come up with equitable and just climate agreement. And so it was our Sangha, the Sangha I belong to, Stillwater Sangha, and 3 other Sanghas in our area that I mentioned. And we also involved the Soto Zen community in the Twin Cities with 2 Zen centers participating and also Insight Meditation Center. And we did walking meditation from one of the Zen centers to our state capital around the grounds and came back to the Zen center. And it was a wonderful positive way to send positive energy to people in Paris working on that climate accord. And people enjoyed it. So we've been doing walking meditation for climate justice. In particular, in the last year, we've done 3 walking meditations here in the Twin Cities, working with Extinction Rebellion on that, sponsoring that, but with involvement, again, from not only our Sanghas here, but also the wider Buddhist community. And so we've walked through city parks. We walked through an ice shanty, which is probably unique to Minnesota. Little houses on a lake, and they were art houses. And so it was part of an event, and that was really wonderful, walking through 6 inches of snow on the lake. And another area besides the involvement with the Buddhist community and with the Sangha directly was involvement in city governments. And this is part of my personal practice, giving back to my community, and involves my mindfulness practice of deep listening, truthful and loving speech, openness and non-attachment to views in particular. And that realizing that city officials are also largely volunteers and are working for the good of the community. And so with that in mind, to work with them. And over time, we've been able to do a lot, especially with solar energy, installing solar on our city hall, our city operations. Their electricity is totally from solar, from a community solar garden. And, you know, it's sometimes you have to play a longer time frame with them, work on things, but you build that trust and with them and being open to their views as well. And it's worked out well with our local government and other local governments here in the Twin Cities. Because in the end, they also want to do the right thing for the community. Keith Bauman.
Thank you, Keith. Sarah, would you like to chime in on this question?
Yeah, Sarah bowing in. Thank you. It's a tricky one, applying Earthholder practices into daily life, because I feel sometimes trapped by like virtue signaling, and then I can turn into a little cyclone inside of myself. I recently heard one of my neighbors say like practicing the Dharma in and training in love is sometimes like a street fight in the soul. So so I've just been reflecting on what's been showing up concretely. There's of course like I hug trees every day, and there's those things, you know, that's very important to me for my own grounding and touching water and doing water rituals for grief. And then there's also like to address one of the questions around being young in the practice and starting a sangha. One of the fruits of having so much online presence is that I've been getting to sit in many sanghas and just receive. And I get to receive on topics and themes that I don't yet know how to lead, and I just get to show up and be held. And then I know that later on, the sangha building and those themes that are really core to my being will come when they're ready. Um, Something we've been doing in Morning Sun has been donating our dana from our online events to local BIPOC farms. Um, my partner is a farmer, and we talk a lot about food apartheid. So the systemic and political segregation of food resource based on communities, which is usually racially defined, and creating local food pockets and just giving as much of my paycheck as I can to local organic food. And not just organic, but focusing on human rights, which is this man-made term for something that's just universally our birthright, but we have not been there. So that's something that I've been really passionate about. And then this pin is for Homestead. Um, that's one of the only lasting for-profit detainment camps for children, and it's in Florida. And Biden just agreed to reopen it. So I was protesting that last year, and I'll be protesting that again. But I still feel that gap between action and words, you know, and that's where the grieving practice comes in, and just having daily conversations around white history and black history and the history of resilience and reparations. So there's a question about nuclear disarmament, and I don't think that I want to try to touch that in 30 seconds. But I really appreciate your guys' questions. Yeah, staying connected inward and moving outward, liberating all of ourselves. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. Yeah, well, the questions are really good. We'll try to get to some of them. One of them I know we'll talk to later, and the one about how we can support BIPOC issues if there are no BIPOC folks in our communities. That's an important one. I'd like to shift to the next topic, some of the challenges and opportunities of building earth-holding sanghas. And I'd like to introduce Andrew Rock, who loves his Dharma name, which is True Collective Healing. He's a retired lawyer and lives with his partner Nancy in Tampa, Florida, and La Havre, Nova Scotia. And Andrew, you've been keen on the importance of community as an essential part of this work. Would you talk to us about that and why?
Building community and support of the planet and its life on Earth and one another, it is a challenge, but it's also, to me, a wonderful joy and a huge opportunity. And it's really the core of my earth holding practice. And I just, in passing, want to address one of the chat questions. We got started when we just picked a date, made an announcement, and said, you know, people who have a similar passion and interest, let's get together. And when we got together, something happened that I remember, I mean, as if it was just a few minutes ago, even though it was 4 or 5 years now. We went around the circle. This was pre-COVID, so we were in person. But I think it's really important that everyone be heard and that everyone hears everyone else. So we went around the circle just to check in who we were, why we were here. And person after person said very much the same thing. I have felt so alone about this. I have felt so hopeless. I haven't known what to believe. I haven't known what to do. I feel powerless. But now that we're together, I don't feel any of that anymore. I really feel energized. Brother Fablé in his wonderful Dharma talk yesterday, talking about the different forms of suffering in addition to anger and fear and despair. I was really happy to hear him talk about isolation, how isolation is disempowering. And I think that's a huge issue that people feel about earth holding and what's going on. And when we come together, we're no longer alone, and we feel much more powerful.
Thank you, Andrew. So Jeffrey, would you speak a little bit about some of the challenges you've run into that other people might when they start to introduce earth holding work into their Sangha?
Thank you, John. I'd like to pick up on something that Andrew just mentioned, which is how overwhelmed so many people feel about the nature of the climate. So many people in our spiritual tradition feel that way, who are not necessarily earth holders, but I would say most people feel this question of, what should I do? I want to do something, I don't know what to do, and then they just kind of revert back to business as usual in their own lives because they really don't have an avenue. And I think in the most basic sense, our small earth holder Sangha sees the service that we can do, the offering that we can provide to our larger, network of Sanghas throughout our region, is to suggest activities and practices that are easy and available to them, that don't take an overwhelming amount of time. For example, we mobilized around the Get Out the Vote campaign in a non-political way, and wrote love letters to people, urging them to vote. Not for any particular candidate, but just opening up our hearts and doing that. And a lot of people were involved in that practice. People wrote hundreds of letters, and it was something that people did together on Zoom, and people who were not part of our Earth Holder Sangha did that. And we're very thankful for the opportunity to be engaged, even in that way. And so we've taken that model and kind of using it now during our state legislative session in Maryland. And we've picked 3 core bills, all of which have a very strong environmental justice component. And we're asking people to write short letters to support those bills. And using the same kind of model. Some people are doing it in person, online. Others are doing it through systems that we're kind of trying to put up. So as a way of kind of addressing the question of what do we do as an Earth Holder Sangha? What can we really provide in addition to our more devotional practices that actually look like they're having some opportunity to make some structural changes in the environmental legal system, for example. So I think that that's important because people want to feel that they're plugged into something that's meaningful, but that's not necessarily something that's going to take over their whole life. And I think that dealing with that sense of despair and anxiety and impending doom that many people feel concretely by offering both our spiritual practice and also kind of manageable, meaningful actions that doing them with patience and with kind of a spirit of peaceful persistence actually might promise to make a difference. Definitely.
Thank you, Jeffrey. The last topic that we have is how do we share our Plum Village practices when we interact with other organizations that are not familiar with us. I'd like to introduce Alex Nunn. He's the head of Movement Building for Action for Happiness. It's a beautiful name, right? An international movement for a happier and kinder society. I'll join that. Currently an ambassador in training for the Applied Compassion Program at Stanford University in California. He is passionate about exploring ways to support young activists in developing more creative and sustainable ways to take action. He lives in London and his Dharma name is True Pure Treasure. So you've been involved with Extinction Rebellion, and you have some stories to share with us, I think, about how you've interacted and brought the practices. Alex, please.
Thanks, John. Lovely to be here in this group. I'm just going to tell one story, I think, in the interest of precious time. On the 19th of April, 2019, I found myself confronted by about 300 police officers in full body armor, helmets, fully equipped with quite a lot of equipment, who were making concentric rings in which were about 150 of my friends, people of all ages, members of the Extinction Rebellion protest, some of whom had their hands stuck together with super glue, some of whom were already chained and bike locked to a frame that was supporting a big pink boat. And that boat was in the middle of Oxford Circus and had been part of a 5-day occupation in which I think about 10,000 people had been involved, rising up to shut London down for the whole of that time. And though the police had come in waves every single day and taken away people, maybe 10 at a time, we had kind of hold on to the site in this most ridiculous way. It felt like we'd just been given a permit to have a constant festival in the middle of central London. But this day was different. They'd come in force. They'd not come to play. They'd come to remove us from the site. And I felt, having spent the last 5 days and nights there as a well-being officer, looking after people and supporting this action, I felt very confronted by that experience. And it changed something in me. I went from being a well-being officer, I had my blue sash rolled up in my pocket, and I jumped over a fence when some police weren't looking. I pretended to be part of a BBC film crew so I could sneak into the cordon. And I got my girlfriend to pass me super glue through the kind of blockade. And my intention, as they were cutting people off the boat and getting ready to move that boat off site, my intention was to super glue my hands, jump through this kind of barrier of police and glue myself heroically to the side of the boat. Now, up until that point, I was able to do things in quite a sort of peaceful but slightly somewhat mischievous way. But in order to take this final step of gluing myself to the boat, I would have had to push officers out of the way, or attempt to, and probably just been arrested in the process with some gluey hands. But I would have had to push past these officers and act in a slightly more disruptive and violent way. And so luckily I checked in with a friend who was standing there, who was holding a flag with a picture of the earth on it. And she heard what I was intending and she said to me, "Don't do that. That's not what we need right now. This boat is sinking and what matters is how it sinks." And those words have really stuck with me. It was such a transformative moment. I let go of the super glue in my pocket. I took out from my other pocket my well-being sash. And I started to just move through the crowd of people, activists, rebels, locked on in the ways that they were. And I started singing Plum Village songs. I started to sing I Am a Cloud. I started to sing various kinds of soothing tones. Yeah. And much like the sound of a bell, it changed the whole tonality of my being. Now, what was really amazing about this was that of the 150 people there, all of the other well-being supporters were immediately grabbed by police and taken off and put into vans and taken away. They weren't allowing anyone to do any support work, apparently, except me. Something about the way that I was present in that space sort of made me invisible to officers who have been briefed to arrest us. So much so that actually I was the third to last person who left that site. They only asked me to leave once the police officers physically couldn't get round me because the cordon had become so small. And that story really sticks with me because it shows the power of practice, the transformative nature of what Thai has given us as an inheritance, and how it can tangibly change the nature of a situation and make material differences to how that situation goes down. The value of me being able to give out water, look after people, take people's details, support people in so many different ways, compared to me just being another guy stuck to the boat, was tangibly different. So that's what I wanted to share. Thanks.
Thank you, Alex. Heather, you've had a lot of experience working with non-Buddhist groups, both in Wisconsin and now in your new home in Charleston. Would you share with us what you've learned, what's applicable from our practice to those situations?
Thank you, John, and I'm sorry to have to turn off my screen, but thank you for listening and hanging in there with me. I guess I'd like to just comment a little bit on what Alex has just shared and say that it reminds me of our dear Dharma sister, Jana Gabar, who, when we were saying, what do we do as earth holders? She said, we bring the bell and we go up on stage before any event and we ask the organizers if we can invite the bell. And she says that has the power to change the entire experience. And so that's something that I've never forgotten. And then I think that what's extraordinary in terms of our tradition and what we've learned is that when we do earth holder practices and we let go of our anger and our fear and we water the seeds of our happiness, that we show up to these opportunities to bring awareness to the cries of the earth with our own joy and our solidity, and that is transformative. I had an experience years ago of pulling together an interfaith group in Wisconsin through my Sangha. We had an Earth Holder project that was back in 2012, 2010, something like that. And there was a mining project that was going up in northern Wisconsin, hundreds of miles away from us, where Native American ancestor wild rice beds were in jeopardy because there was a mining company that wanted to do mountaintop removal, and they wanted to mine sulfite. And when this sulfite mixed with air and water, it was going to turn into sulfuric acid and not only destroy these ancestral rice beds, but they were also the water filtration system for the entirety of Lake Superior. And this was just a horrible idea. And I was able to, working with the Sangha, pull together this interfaith group. And the piece that was missing for people that we were able to bring from our tradition was how to demonstrate applied ethics. How do we take our deep knowing about what is going to bring suffering and what is going to bring well-being and apply it to this situation giving each faith community the opportunity to articulate it in their own way. And we created a petition that was a multi-faith statement of ethics and science. And we called for a moratorium on mining law, moratorium law for stopping mining. And we asked for, within this interfaith community, a coordinated week of service where the petition and this effort went into the church bulletins and people spoke about it from the pulpit. And we were encouraging people to contact their elected officials. And in the process, it just made people aware that what was happening with this Native American community up hundreds of miles away from us was directly relevant to our own lives. And this again is part of that skillful means about looking at who is the most vulnerable. And I would encourage everyone to look to those groups like the Native rights groups to help them network and support, and to follow the lead of those people who are most oppressed. We have in Charleston, I'll just close with this, a problem with flooding in our city. I came to the city because it is so vulnerable. And of course, the places where the flooding is the worst and the mold in the homes is the worst are the people that have been not included in the conversation. And I'm working with an interfaith group there, and we're looking at partnering with environmental groups and really raising awareness. And I'm looking for, I haven't quite found it yet, but that exact way to lift up the voices of those people who are most vulnerable to the flooding and to the climate challenge in the community where I live. But in the meantime, raising awareness and doing the simple things that are in front of us to do as we're friend making and bringing our own joy forward. That's why I enjoy earth holding and protecting. Thank you. Heather bowing out.
Thank you, Heather. And Andrew, I'm wondering if you would close out this part by just sharing your experience in working with non-Buddhist groups.
Thank you, John. And I'll just tell another brief anecdote. I'm part of the Tampa Bay Climate Alliance. And about a year ago, I offered, if there was an interest, to lead some sort of mindfulness practice or event. So they organized what they called a mindfulness social online one evening. And we started, as I said before, going around the virtual circle. And a couple of the people who had come straight from a city council meeting where they fully expected to have a pro-environment ordinance passed because people had told them they would vote for it. But one of those people, in fact, voted against it, and the ordinance failed. And both of these people just said how furious they were about this person kind of turning on them that way. And so we started with a guided meditation, had people sit and get into their breathing and their bodies. Didn't go very long or very deep, but I did talk very briefly about developing understanding and compassion that, you know, the people we view as our opposition, if we had the same subjects and causes and conditions they're subject to, we might do the same. Afterwards, in the go round at the end and by email afterwards, both of those people spoke up and they said, you know, I'm not so angry anymore. I have compassion for this person because I do understand the pressures he was under. That amazed me, but you know, it's just a demonstration of the power of this practice. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. And thank you, everybody. There was one question. We're out of time for the panel part. In a moment, Simona is going to share a few resources, and we'll have a time for a short closing meditation before we close. One question that came in, I wanted to just say one thing about. It was about how can we, in basically white communities or Sangha, support the BIPOC awareness and development? And it's an important question because if we stay separate in our awareness, the perpetuation of the division will remain. So one of the things that I recommend to people is to really For one, for white people to do their own work on their internalized racism and unconscious bias, to educate ourselves around the issues, to support BIPOC-led organizations. There are two in the United States which I think are really well positioned to do work. One is in Indigenous Environmental Network, and the other is the Climate Justice Alliance, both people of color led, to support them with finances and send people to those resources. And to when we're doing our work in basically white communities, to always emphasize the environmental racism and environmental justice issues that are part of what we're paying attention to, because they are everywhere, even in white communities. And as Sarah was saying earlier, it's also a class stuff. So to make the links between class suppression of, as Reverend Barber says, low wealth people and the environmental issues is really important. So thanks everybody. Hope this was useful for you. I'm sorry we didn't get a chance to answer everyone's questions. What we'll do is download the file, and those of you who have questions, we'll try to get back to you individually. So Simona, over to you.
Dear friends, Simona bowing in, just with a couple notes about how to continue this conversation. We had a lot of really great questions coming through, which I'm so grateful for. And like John said, we're going to save that. And one resource that I'm putting in the chat right now is the Earth Holder website. So if you take away any resource about how to stay connected with everyone on this call in the larger Earth Holder community, this is the resource, because it has links to, say, our newsletter sign up, which I promise we are very intentional about what we send out. It's announcements for our online Sangha, for retreats. A couple notes about our online Sangha. It's the second Sunday and fourth Sunday of the month. This upcoming Sunday, it does come at a time while you're all on retreat, but Sarah, who is on the call with us now, is going to be facilitating that. It's 60-minute call at 6 p.m. Eastern. Yeah. And in March, it is going to be facilitated second Sunday, March 14th, by Kia Ocampo-Go, who is an Earth Holder Community Caretaking Council member, Filipino social worker, just does amazing work with frontliners in response to disaster relief. So please remember that you can also contact me. I'm putting my email in the chat, and you're very, very welcome to get in touch with me about events, ongoings, about joining the Earth Holder Mindful Hub, which is a platform for sharing all of these great resources. And with that, I'm going to bow out and hand it over to Sarah, who's going to be guiding us in the closing meditation. Thank you, dear ones.
Dear friends, I would first like to see if we want to stay on Spotlight or if we would like to go on to Gallery View with everybody. How about we go on to Gallery View? Brother Dukneem, would you be willing to wipe us all away? Well, actually, I can help. Remove Spotlight. Remove Spotlight. Remove Spotlight. Yay. And then we'll be popping, if you would like, you could stay on speaker view, which will keep me up there, or you could toggle on your screen and go into gallery view so that we can be together. It's so nice to see all of your faces. I really look forward to the day we can be on retreat together in Plum Village, walking barefoot in the grass, hearing the birds calling. The birds are starting to emerge here in the deep winter. Can feel the signs of spring. The maple syrup is running. We just began maple tapping. So like we started, I want to invite you to sweep away on your faces or anywhere that you need. If your shoulders are being held up by your ears like earrings can release them down. And then once you're ready, finding a comfortable position and placing one hand on your low belly, one hand up on your heart, and letting your eyes close and asking your heart, how am I doing? Noticing what you notice, and any answer is good. I'll invite one sound of the bell and offer a sharing of the merit, during which you can keep your eyes closed and just let the words wash over you. And we let go. We let go of